The original ideas for my garment came from retrofuturism and the push towards the future in fashion. So I thought towards, well, from our modern day, what would be in the future? We're facing issues with climate change, changing temperatures, extreme weather conditions. So the inspiration behind my garment was a piece that would be able to adapt to those different conditions, as well as tackling modern issues like fast fashion and renewable resources. Future and present climate change and the changing of temperatures and weather conditions in the future was a real inspiration for the basis of my garment. It really inspired the main features that I included. For example, removable sleeves that were meant to adapt to different intense temperatures, a UV resistant hood that can resist rain, snow, sleet, all those extreme weather events that will be happening in the future. To research my garment and get inspiration for the different works I'd be using, I looked at various designers. For example, Paco Rabanne was a real inspiration for me, especially his retrofuturism in his materials and color palettes, as well as Pinterest and the different ways you can research specific looks, for example, metals in fashion or incorporation of technology. I did a lot of my original brainstorming in different notebooks that I would use. So I would go on Pinterest and find photos that I found interesting, and I would print them out and put them in and notate them, describe what elements I liked, what elements I didn't like, what elements I could use. I would also do sketches of different iterations, and once I determined that I wanted to make a jacket, I went through probably 6 different iterations of that jacket, just refining the features, seeing what would work, what's possible, what's not possible, which would look the best, which is the most functional, and also using the NESA criteria to really hit the different marks of what I needed to include. For example, elements like laser cutting, multiple different fastenings, dyeing, printing, applique, all those elements. I sourced most of my fabrics from the fabric store in Surrey Hills, which is really useful. I went there and I showed them the different elements I want to include, for example, clear vinyl, and they would talk me through and show me all the different options. Sometimes I would pick the most economical option, but sometimes the extra priced ones had better quality, or they had features I wanted to include, for example, dyeing or special coatings or specific finishes that I needed in order to really match the intended use of my apparel. Apart from my main fabrics, the other materials that I need to source, including zippers, snap fasteners, buttons, and all those different elements, I went to Spotlight for, and they were really useful because they have a wide range of different colors and sizes of things I needed. So the main factors that influenced the materials I chose were, first of all, look. I wanted to choose the one that best represented the vision I had. So I went to my sketches and I said, okay, well, if this has a silver metallic sheen, then how am I going to enrich that in the fabric? So I talked to the workers at the store and say, hey, this is the kind of finish I want, and they talked me through, okay, we can do a cotton or a linen with this water resistant coating that would achieve your functional and your visual preferences. So before I even started constructing my major work, I first made a toile, which was probably my 3rd iteration of my design. I made that out of cotton calico. And that was really good because it let me experiment with every single detail I want to use. So I included every single possible element, knitted gloves, special hoods, face coverings, all the different elements that I want to use. And I said which ones worked and which ones didn't work, as well as what was the process that I needed to use in order to reach these elements in the final garment. So that definitely influenced the order of processes of construction in my final garment. Testing for my product involved a wide range of different experiments I conducted, including testing the features of the different fabrics I had chosen or different potential fabrics, the uses of different tools I could use, for example, different closing methods I could use, just as a way to ensure that my product was the most efficient it could be. So that when I started construction, I knew that the materials and the tools that I had chosen would be the best possible ones to use when I was creating my garment. The utilization of a toile also helped me determine the different fabrics I'd need. So for example, I determined that to achieve a wide and large structure of the jacket, I'd have to have a thick and strong fabric. So I couldn't use any silks or any delicate fabrics, I would have to use a thick coated cotton or linen, which was exactly what I used. Before purchasing my fabric, I went through a deep elaboration of which features that my garment needed to have. For example, UV resistance, strength, elasticity, all those different features that would need to be included in my materials. So that meant when I was selecting and elaborating which materials to use, the ones I selected fit all those features and more. I started work on my portfolio at the start of Year 12, so before I even had any idea what my garment was going to be, I was still elaborating the different ideas I wanted to include. So from my notebook, I would take sketches and different elements I wanted to include and put those in my portfolio and write paragraphs on which elements I liked, which elements I didn't like. Some were deleted, some were kept, but it just meant that I had a full, broad cover of all the different elements that I could include. I was able to more deeply evaluate the different features I needed and help refine my garment even more. And as a result, at the end, my folio was finished a lot earlier and my folio more accurately represented the whole time I'd spent working on the garment. The folio layout I used was from my first 2 projects. So for my first assessment in Year 11, I created the first half of the portfolio along with a bag. And for the second assessment in Year 11, I created the second half of the folio with a Sengen jacket. So that meant that when I was able to create my final portfolio, I had the 2 halves already made. And so all I did was replace the old text with my new current text. I did have to slightly alter it to include new elements that I hadn't before, such as creation labels and different material evaluations. I did have some major design changes in my garment while producing, and that was because I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to make a set of pants that would match the jacket. I was strongly encouraged to by my teacher, but I didn't know if I would have enough time. So I designed the pants and I kept them in my back pocket just in case I had enough time. But while I was working, it was made clear that even if I set through more than enough time, I still wouldn't have my jacket up to the standard that I wanted. So I decided to focus all of my energy on the jacket instead of the pants, as just a way to get all the elements into the jacket that I wanted. If I had extra time at the end, I would have made the pants, but I decided in the end that it was better to spend all the time on my jacket and have a completed piece early, finished before the deadline, rather than have 2 pieces finished later than the deadline and not up to the standard that I knew I could set for myself. The areas I used my teacher's help in the most was for the practical elements of my project. So for example, skills I didn't know, putting zippers on curves or installing buttons. From having no previous sewing experience, I didn't know how to do most of these things. So she would show me how to do those in class, and I would go home and practice those on my sewing machine just before I put them in my project. And she was really helpful in working me through the process and making sure everything was completed on a deadline. I had a list of different elements that I needed completed and what time I needed them completed by. And she was great at checking up and making sure that my project was completed on the time I needed it to. And she was very clear with what needed to happen when it needed to happen. The best piece of advice I received from my teacher and from my parents was time management and starting early. So I started my folio as soon as I started Year 12, even before I knew what my project was going to be. I was working on my folio, going through different designs in which I could include. And I also started a toile earlier, so I completed that in the school holidays before 2024. And that made it a lot easier for me to evaluate which parts of my jacket worked and which parts of my jacket didn't. So the whole time I was working away in the background. In lessons, I would usually work on my jacket if I could. If not, I would work on my portfolio. But at home, I was always adding those little extra elements that I could at home with my hand sewing, or really elaborating on my portfolio and in my notebook, going through different iterations and deciding what would work and what wouldn't work, and how it would be actually feasible for me to make those in the time frame that I was provided. I got a lot of advice of the project from my mum, and she told me all about the proper time management that was needed to complete the project. So she knew from past experience how quickly a work can swallow you and how so many small little details can take a whole lesson to complete. It's very important to just continue working and set clear goals and say, if this isn't done by this date, then this needs to be done by this date. It's all a balancing act of whether you can get things done before or after, or setting realistic goals, not setting outlandish goals that you know you can't complete even with help.